card to the cloud. Perfect.
And anyone, if there's anything specific you want to learn or have us say or not say, let us know.
Yeah, so nothing is off the table except for anything that might be considered illegal, but otherwise. I did make a few slides, but perhaps we can wait a few minutes to start the talks at the academic time, I guess, maybe people are trying to run from other talks. 26, that's great. A lot of people I don't know, that's wonderful.
Who's here from Twitter?
Yes. Oh, well.
Well, technically, most of us.
Yeah. Yeah, most of us live on Twitter now, I guess.
Twitter and Zoom.
And Zoom, yeah.
Oh, we got another second attached consulate of Oz. And UK represent. Awesome.
Yeah. Germany too, someone from, yeah.
Southwestern Indiana, unfortunately. Well, okay. No comment. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess maybe we should get going. So let me start sharing my little desktop. Yeah, so thank you everyone, especially the speakers and panelists for joining and the students. This has been something I wanted to do for a long time, so I'm very excited and very happy to be doing this. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep, looks good.
Yep.
You might want to just go into presenter mode. Oh, you're doing it.
Yeah, I have two screens and Zoom is not very good to deal with multiple screens. Anyway, so the idea here is to basically help students and postdocs, make a good plan for their career as a whole, holistically, not just academia, but also non-traditional careers beyond academia. So the premise of this is, I personally believe academia is a bit more of a Ponzi scheme than not. And for many reasons, we'll probably need another panel to discuss that and whatnot. So which is causing a lot of stress and pain for people who are basically trying to succeed, because the number of the traditional professorial jobs are so low compared to the huge pipeline of graduate students and postdocs they put out. And issues with academia have been identified for a long time. As I was reading various papers and articles on this, I realized that people have called it out at least 2 to 3 decades earlier, and not much has changed since. So for many reasons, I think one of the big ones being it is not in the interest of the people in the power to reform it, in my personal opinion. So there's not a lot of honest discourse about it, and people even today, when I call academia Ponzi scheme, many people get really, really offended and push back. They take it personally. They think that they're running a Ponzi scheme when I call the system a Ponzi scheme. So basically, there is not a lot of honest discourse, which is actually causing a lot of pain. And I actually faced a lot of difficulties and stress when I was trying to find an academic job while finishing PhD as well as while finishing postdoc. So I did seriously attempt to actually leave academia, find R&D jobs in industry, biomedical engineering arena. And I had a lot of surprises along the way, and I was not really prepared at all on one after the other. That made me really feel that we need much more awareness and we need to be much more planned for this. We can't just one day decide, oh, I'm going to go to the industry, and it's not going to happen, because there's a lot of things need to happen. At least based on my own personal experience, I feel like there is a somewhat cycle like this to make that I tried to summarize here, in which involves a big decision in terms of realizing whether would you be happy, whether someone would be happy leaving academia. You know, a lot of the students are attracted to the sciences, promising great life or career and whatnot, and then they're in for big disappointment, right? And when they decide they need to, when they realize they may have to leave, there's actually a bit of soul searching involved that takes time. Nobody can help them other than themselves in terms of realizing what they want in life, how they want to achieve it, where they want to achieve it, etc. Right? So I feel it takes at least 2 years, but it is totally anecdotal and personal. So I thought I will talk to experts, which are our panel today, to help us really describe various challenges. They've been trying to help a number of graduate students and postdocs over the years. And the rough agenda for today is essentially like there will be a short talk / intro from each panelist / speaker. They summarize their experience and they summarize their suggestions for students and postdocs, and an open discussion between the panel to try to come up with some sort of a practical guide. You know, how do we go about executing this so-called exit plan? In my opinion, I don't know if it's the right term to call it, but yeah, that's what I have in mind. So thanks again for the panelists and everyone for joining. So I don't know, perhaps maybe we can go ahead with Dr. Jennifer Polk. Did I say it right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean, she's one of the first pro. Oh wait, I have to stop sharing my screen.
You have.
Yeah. She's one of the first pro leaving academia consultants I've come across back when I was a PhD student, and her organization / website, you know, from PhD to life, perfectly summarizes the goal of my panel today, because that's important to realize that there is good life beyond academia, and we can be happy doing science or not doing science and doing other creative opportunities too. So she's, just to introduce her briefly, she's a career coach and consultant. She launched the From PhD to Life, a career coaching and speaking business in 2013, and later co-founded the Beyond Professoriate business she left in January 2020. She speaks on a number of topics on university campuses and at academic and professional conferences. Writes a lot of regular articles and blogs on university affairs. And she was an expert panelist recently on the Canadian Council of Academies report called Degrees of Success. So she earned her PhD in history from the University of Toronto. So without further ado, Dr. Polk, please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm going to share my screen and make sure I'm on the right slide. Okay, awesome. So I do have a short presentation for you, and it's going to focus on individuals. And I'm calling this the PhD job search common missteps and what to do instead. And you can see my full screen, right? Big white background. Awesome. Thanks, Gary. I can see you nodding. Okay, let's do it. I'm going to set my timer here. So misstep number 1, framing your job search around your PhD and your academic discipline. Okay, let me say what I mean by this. So for example, are you doing this, Googling what job can I get with a PhD or jobs for PhDs at insert discipline? Right? Anyone doing that? And I know I did this kind of thing years ago. And I'm not saying don't do this, right? It's fine. But I don't want you to be only doing this, right? Don't only do this. If you look at people who have PhDs, the jobs that they actually have, you'll find that most of the time those folks, and I'm speaking in general here, of course, most of the time those folks, their jobs don't require a PhD. So the only point I'm making here is that if you are focused your job search entirely around the fact of your PhD, you might be missing out on a ton of great opportunities that could be out there for you that you never come across, right? So, don't only look for jobs for PhDs. I'm moving quickly. So number 2, worrying that working outside of academia will make you a failure, a sellout, or intellectually bereft in somehow. Again, super common worry, right? Is this your mind sometimes? It's not wrong to have these thoughts, right? Our thoughts are our thoughts, but don't let them guide your job search, right? Don't let these thoughts be in charge of what you do. And in fact, you don't have to worry at all. So here's a long quote. I have endless quotes like this, but let me read it out. I have a dual PhD in gender and women's studies and psychology. I'm currently in the private sector as director of research at an organization in Seattle. And here's the key point. Leaving academia was the best and most impactful decision of my life. I love my job. I feel supported and respected in my current role. So that's Jennifer Rubin again. That's just one quote. I have so many of these. Okay, third mistake, not adequately tailoring your resumes when applying for non-academic jobs. Again, super common. So here's what a CV looks like. It's lists of things. I might be exaggerating a little bit to make a point, but you feel me, right? Lists of degrees, lists of publications, lists of courses taught, whatever. And everybody looking at this within academia kind of gets it, right? It makes sense. Resumes, on the other hand, emphasize skills and they put accomplishments in context for readers. So although CVs and resumes are both marketing documents, they have that in common, they are completely different usually in terms of what and how they're marketing you as a job seeker, right? So you want to make sure that you actually are writing resumes and that you're tailoring appropriately. So here's what I want you to do instead. And I call this the PhD Career Clarity System. And maybe that sounds a bit silly, but just go with it, right? Easy enough to remember. And it's 3 steps, 3 easy steps, maybe not so easy, but easy to say. So let's go through them one at a time. So step 1, focus on yourself. I want you to do this first. And this is when you get clear on all of the things that matter and are relevant for your job search. So your skills and strengths, all of your experiences, not just academic, your knowledge and interests, your values, goals, priorities, etc. Yes, your PhD and your discipline and your dissertation, all of that too, but all the other stuff as well. Okay, focus on yourself. Second step, this is when you do research, especially by conducting informational interviews. What's an informational interview? It's when you talk with people who have jobs that interest you and you ask them about it and you ask for their advice, right? And in this section, this step, identify possibilities. Once you've done this research, you can make a short list of job types that you want to go for that makes sense for you and all the stuff that you've learned about yourself and focus on yourself. Okay. Now you're ready for step 3, which is when you're an active job seeker. And this is when you're going to write resumes and cover letters. It's when you're going to update your LinkedIn profile or your personal website, whichever makes sense for you. And whatever else that you need to do because of the types of jobs that you're applying for, right? So you don't need to worry about your resume before you even know what kind of jobs you want. You don't have to waste your time. And in this section, you want to keep networking until you get where you want to go. And that's kind of the 5-minute version. So that's the way I look on the internet. My headshot is a lie, but that's it for the moment. And yeah, as was mentioned, my website is from phdtolife.com. And that's also my Twitter handle. I'm also on LinkedIn. So feel free to follow me on the internet. Thanks. Let me stop the share. That's it.
Thanks a lot, Jennifer. So maybe we can go ahead to Dr. James Heathers. Most of you probably know him from various venues. So just a brief bio. He's a PhD from the University of Sydney, Australia. He's a research scientist for a while, but now is the Chief Scientific Officer of Selfreflection. And I know him through many venues, but most importantly, when he was deciding to left academia, he was pretty vocal about it, trying to convey the reasons and explaining why it's better and whatnot. And he's also a strong proponent for paid contracts for peer review, about $450, if I remember it correctly. And the co-host of a great podcast called Everything Harris, where they discuss a number of science-related issues. And It's also recently been trying to catch fraud and bad signs and do some psychom. And I value these experiences and perspectives. So I hope James can impart some wisdom on us.
Great, no pressure. Okay, also no slides. Jennifer does this for a living and is good at it. I don't. I'm merely an overqualified loudmouth who's from a place, as I said before, the floating consulate of Australia. Let's try to keep this brief. Quick story on what happened. PhD 2016, I could get the year wrong. Honestly, I just don't think it was 2017. Postdoc, research scientist, middle of the plague, jumped. Now I'm the CSO of a company that builds medical wearables. I violated Jennifer's rule number 1 completely in the fact that my PhD is intimately related to the work that I do now. And likewise, so is the various professional science jobs that I've had. It's all tied up in a bow. Now, I'll tell you why that works. Pradeep said 2 years. I think you could do it in 1. It took me 4. As in, this was my plan B. What I'm doing right now with my beautiful pink shirt and my tech guy haircut, as in not a haircut. It took me, I had a potential share transfer agreement with the company that I work for right now in 2017. I didn't take any equity at the time. It was a matter of, if you join us at some point in time, this will happen. Now, that was never, it was never taken care of at the time. I didn't get anything, but I was planning that far out. I have a plan B right now, which we won't go into because startups, and my company is a startup, are fragile and difficult places to work. So I have a plan B right now. I have sort of plans C through F as well that are in various states of disrepair. I'd like them to be better planned, because as much as I look like I've been retrieved from under a bridge most of the time, I do have the scientific tendency to think in years. And that's one of the single best things that you can do, especially if anyone's here, your sort of first, second year PhD, or you're thinking, well, there's 2 years left on my contract, 3 years left on my contract, you have time. The problem with giving advice about something like this is the fact that there are enormous differences between any individual area of research endeavor. If you're in geoengineering or mining, it's actually reasonably uncommon to go and get a PhD job, simply because the extracting things from the ground is a tremendous business, and they love employing people who've got degrees. There's areas of engineering as well, where people will try and hire you just for being alive. You push that all the way through to the other end. So if you're in one of those areas, so some of them, some areas of mining research, the reproduction rate's actually lower than 1. As in, everyone who wants an academic job can have one because there's literally one available. Everyone else is making their way out of the pipeline. At the other end, where unfortunately most of us probably work, it can be somewhere between sort of 15 and 25. And that's not to say that everything proceeds through the academic hierarchy that you've been previously introduced to. I'll say 2 more things and I'll shut up. First of all, what Jennifer just said about what is called an informational interview is the art of getting people to talk to you about what they do and figuring out how non-academic landscapes work is the single most important thing that you need to do before you decide on how will I fit into this landscape. Because a lot of the time you don't know what the jobs are, what exactly would that consist of. I've had someone ask me at a career fair once, who's like, I'm here to learn about getting an industry job. What kind? For who? Doing what? Not sure. Just feel like I want to work in industry. Okay, so you've made that decision. Could you please give me literally any other noun that applies to what you're planning on doing with your life? The answer at the time was no. How that uncertainty goes away is largely mediated by people, not secondary sources, but actual people. About 2/3 of the jobs that we've given out at any given point in time at my company are not from resumes that turned up. It's either from people that we went looking for or things that we weren't advertising in the first place. Opportunities like these come through networks, and they're not particularly difficult to build because in general, people will talk to you about what they do because they're doing exactly the same thing, trying to figure out where the land lies, talking to people where and if necessary about their industry. People in industry are just like people in academia. They talk to each other all the time. It's also, I would question, as much as they can be very useful, I would question the idea that you can just troll through Indeed.com or Seek, or there was Monster in Australia back in the day, and try and find out. I can tell you from first-hand experience, hiring managers do not do a great job of keeping those updated. They will give you an idea of what the categories are, but a lot of the time, a job ad can be 3 months old and still be left up. I saw one the other day where I actually know the guy who's getting hired into the position and the role's still open. So that happens. That happens all the time. Informational interviews are key. It really is. A lot of this is the knowledge that you need. The local knowledge is mediated by people. It isn't written down. It isn't something that you can read. And your first instinct is probably very similar to mine, which is let's go out and read about it. Avoid that. It's a system built out of people. And a lot of the time, they're surprisingly approachable. The final thing that I'll say is it's very difficult sometimes to get the appropriate resources locally where you are. Some universities, very few though, have a reasonable entree to different jobs that you can learn about. They have career fairs that aren't awful. They have advice that isn't completely local, but the vast majority of them stink at it. And there's very few people, especially within your local academic environment, who are going to give you a sage advice about jobs that they don't have in an environment that you go to and not work for them anymore. It's really not in the interest of anyone that you work with or for or around to be able to graduate you into something you might find interesting elsewhere. So this is something that you have to figure out on your own. And it's very annoying because we often feel that if it's such a big thing, systems should be available to organize it for you. Usually there aren't any, or if there are some, they aren't any good. So far be it from me to put all the responsibility on your plate, but here we are. I'm done.
Thanks a lot, James. Yeah, I can't agree more about the comment that most of the profs actually have no idea how industry works. And they can't really help you with getting jobs because they themselves don't have any connections, except in some small niche fields where they work with a lot with the industry. That is not true with most of the fields. So next, I'm just picking names. I'm not going in any particular order. So we can have Dr. Sonali Mazunda. She's an associate director of professional development at the University of Virginia, where she creates avenues for professional development of PhD students and postdocs to become influential professionals in diverse careers. She built strategy, design, operation, and administration of a venture called PhD Plus, a new professional development program for all PhD students and postdocs at the University of Virginia. She moved into this role after a decade in life sciences research as a PhD and postdoc scientist. As a trained RNA biologist, she investigated CRISPR-Cas systems in PhD at the University of Georgia and the interplay of alternate mRNA processing events during brain development and association of microRNAs in the recurrent pan-cancer mutations in postdoc at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Prior to PhD training, she was a clinical embryologist in an IVF lab in a healthcare center in India. She leveraged her training in Israel to set up a lab and serve as an IVF practitioner for 2 years. So without further ado, Dr. Mazunda.
Thank you, Pradeep, for inviting me. I echo James' absolutely that don't have one plan, have 50. And, first of all, acknowledge the fact that your interests and values would keep changing as you evolve and you have experiences. And the second is environment of jobs are evolving, and some jobs that most of us were preparing for are not going to be a reality or are not a reality anyways. And a lot of new interesting jobs might come up. And so to the fact that Pradeep gave a long, sort of professional history for me, I've already had transitions between 3 different sectors, in clinical, hospital environment, to academic research, to now academic administration. And none of them were intentional. They were all spontaneous. They were, things that I experienced during my postdoc that really made me committed to advocacy. And Gary knows this. We met during our postdoc, my postdoc time, in creating professional development for PhDs and postdocs as a function of our lived experience. And so all that to say is listen to yourself. A couple things that I would say are really fundamental, and I wish I had thought about it before, is thinking about your why you do things you do, why you started your PhD, what really motivated you. And the second is what you really like about the experiences, and of course, like. I do not necessarily, after looking at a lot of career outcomes data for PhDs in the United States, I'm moving away from acknowledging sectors as a primary distinction of jobs. Academia, industry, government, nonprofits are very fluid and secondary to jobs. What you really need to focus more on is job functions. And that's where your interest matters. Do you really like research, or do you like more the communication aspect of science, or do you like more the problem solving analytical aspects? And so based on your interests, look at the alignment with the job functions that you can do in academia or industry or government or nonprofit. And so, for example, if you're most interested in communication, you can do that anywhere. You have to think about your other identities in terms of whether you're an immigrant, if you have family, support, caregiving support, where do you want to be located? And those things are important. And based on that, look, even when you're talking to people and you're doing informational, think of, create a vision board for yourself for the next few years of what are the jobs, where they are, what different sectors they exist in, and see which ones would make you happy, both professionally and personally. That's like my big takeaway from here. Because I mean, the more and more I see career outcomes data, PhDs are changing fields every 3 to 4 years. And the future of work is changing, really fast. Like James said, for some fields, you just have to have a degree in that field and you'll probably be hired, and then for some other fields, you'll have to translate your experiences more broadly. And so know what your interests are, know what your strengths are, assess some of the constraints that you have. For example, I was really interested in science communication, but being an immigrant in the United States, the job options for that are hard. Nonprofits are not necessarily akin to supporting your immigration pathway for that. A lot of the work that I'm doing right now is more feasible to do within academia than outside, because it was very hard for them to change my transition, my visa from academic researcher visa into an industry visa, not doing research. And so sometimes trying to see if you want to change your interest into a non-traditional path, look at which sector you can do it more reasonably at, and don't have a binary thinking about sectors. That doesn't, at least in my experience, doesn't help always. And so that's where I'd leave it at. And I'd be happy to take the conversation further with everyone else. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sonali. Next, maybe we can have Dr. Gary Mcdougall. Hopefully I said the name right. He's a freelance academic and consultant. I know of him through his great advocacy work over the years to raise awareness of the dire state of postdocs and how to improve their life via many venues, including the Future of Research. He co-founded. And now he, what do you call this? He has a freelance company now called Lightoller. Read the About section of the website, has a very interesting story on relating to Titanic and Leonardo DiCaprio, I guess, if I can exaggerate it a bit, which provides expertise on early career researchers in order to effect changes to help ECRs, that is, early career researchers, reach their full potential. So without further ado, Dr. McDowell.
Hi, thanks, Pradeep, and thanks everyone on the panel. It's great to be with this group of people who I all know. I haven't met everyone in person yet, but it's great to see everyone. So just a quick thing about my route. My background is sort of chemistry, biochemistry. I did bachelor's, master's, PhD, then came over to the US and did 2 postdocs in succession. And during the time doing my postdocs, I became more interested in how science is done, and particularly from the perspective of the people involved, and have really settled into this interesting question of how do we help people reach their potential to affect change, to solve problems. We have no shortage of problems in today's world. We have no shortage, really, I think, of people trying to solve those problems. And yet I think we have quite a bad disconnect, particularly through the academic training system of helping people to move into those roles. So a lot of what I think about and do is from a systemic perspective and the overall system of academia. So I'm sort of going to talk from a little bit of a bigger picture side of things and less on the side of individual action. And one of the things I found most interesting in thinking about this topic, which I had been thinking about a little before Pradeep approached me about the panel, is the sort of whole concept of one's identity within the academy and how that actually makes the problem of exiting harder. And I have sort of 2 major points I want to get across, which kind of contradict each other, because it's me, and also because it's me. The first point basically contradicts with the entire premise of the panel, which is, what is it to leave the academy? What is it to exit? And the idea here is there's no arbitration of who is in the academy and who is not. And there is no clear border of where that is. I describe myself as a freelance academic because I write papers, I apply for grants, get rejected from grants, sometimes get grants. You don't have to be in the academy, you don't have to be in a university to get rejected from grants. I do research, I publish things, I give talks, I go to conferences, I review papers, I sit in the study sections. I do all of the things that I enjoyed about being in the academy. And a reason that I left was that I don't want to have to deal with the things that faculty have to deal with. And I certainly wanted to work on this issue while as a full-time thing. And I felt like being faculty and also trying to do this kind of work would just end up being very frustrating. So all that to say, there's not a binary here. There is a spectrum of who is in the academy and who is not, and what that means and what it means to be an academic. And the academy is a system, universities are a system for solving problems and thinking about and how to do research, in the same way that pharma and industry and biotechs and nonprofits and even the operation that I have as a one-person single member for-profit business are all different ways of trying to work within fixing problems. And I think the idea that we have is that we have this cultural expectation that the academy is the only place to do research, and that anyone who leaves is therefore somehow not, or that there is a different value system. I think this is articulated quite often in my sphere of the concept of leaving science, which people equate with leaving a research lab in a university. From a workforce perspective, most scientists are not in universities. Most bench scientists are not in universities in the US. And so there's this weird idea of, there's actually a sort of minority group that has decided that they are the ones who are the arbiters of science. And so that's like a really interesting thing. And so, I'm basically saying this is a construct that doesn't exist. That said, my second point refutes that, which is, of course, like any construct, you still have to navigate it while you're leaving the academy, while you're going through this process. And I think I can speak to this most personally. As Pradeep mentioned, I set up a nonprofit with other postdocs and got funding to run it. And I had this offer to do this work that was really interesting and exciting to me at a salary that was more than twice what I was earning as a postdoc. And I arguably could, I think it, I think arguably I might have been the biomedical postdoc in the US, possibly the world, who knew the most data about why this was a rational decision to leave, who was looking at all the outcomes data, who was looking at the labor market, who was looking at the state of the academy, and it would be the most rational decision ever. And still I paused about doing it. And I think that, there's been a push that I have been part of in like transparency about career outcomes, which I think should happen just because I think it's good for people to see where people are going and that we're tracking where people are. But I disagree with the premise that more people will choose not to do postdocs if they see this data. I don't think that will make really any difference, because we have all this cultural baggage and this identity that we must be, that we in the academy are the same thing. And so that's what I'm become a lot more interested in, is in thinking about how to disentangle our identities from what is actually just a system, a structure, and instead realize like our actual agency in affecting change, in doing research, and doing, whatever it is that you enjoy doing. A lot of people with PhDs who have moved on to other kinds of roles, I think everyone on the panel here probably will say there are things that I enjoyed doing before that I do now that I still enjoy doing. And there are things that I didn't enjoy in the academy that I didn't, that I don't have to do now. A big thing that was really helpful for me in this was a paper, which I'll drop in the chat, by Kenneth Gibbs. And I would recommend reading all of Kenny Gibbs's papers. But this one in particular talks about research looking at how people's values affect whether they stay in the academy. And the long and the short of it is that one of the key factors in whether people stay in the academy is if it reflects their values. And I find this very helpful because there are all sorts of things that I feel passionate about in doing research and doing science that I just didn't see happening in the academy, or that I saw there were other incentives. For example, publishing only positive results in high impact factor journals in order to advance one's career. And for me, a big issue in leaving the academy and the regular path was there's just too much prioritization and focusing on one's career rather than focusing on science. And I find that really not where I wanted to be going. So all this to say, one thing that I am thinking of in terms of like thinking of actual solutions is trying to figure out how we can start to tease apart these things and help people navigate that process. Because there's sort of a logistical process of applying for jobs and getting things and so on, but so much of that is hindered. And I've experienced this, I continued to experience this through the pandemic. I left the academy 6 years ago, and still this is the thing that I grapple with. And so I'm trying to figure out how to develop tools, resources, structures around that more broadly. Just because this is an audience that I think might be interested, I'll drop my email and website in the chat, because I'm looking to like beta test for free some course or some resources around everything I've talked about, which as you can tell, I could probably talk about for hours. So if anyone is interested in finding out more about that, you can just drop me an email or fill out my contact form and just say, hey, I'm interested in finding out more, and I'll try and keep you in the loop about this as I'm moving forward. It's a new kind of area of interest for me. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Gary. So you made this interesting point about even if the awareness of data about various career paths, even with that awareness, many will continue to do a lot of postdocs. Did I get that right? Can you explain that quickly before we move to Dr.
Just very quickly, 80% of biomedical PhDs will do a postdoc in the US. Biomedical PhDs in the US will do a postdoc in the US. And I'm even like doing a little contract at the moment where I'm talking to grad students. Like it's just very clear that people are like, well, it's something that's very similar. It's the easiest, it's the path of least resistance, first of all. There are lots of postdoc positions available. It's very similar to grad school. Often you can get set up with one through your PI. It's just like there's a lot of factors that line up, and you're not having to deal with this. I can see people are like, I will think about this when I'm a postdoc. And I always say, don't, because you're just going to be 4 years later from where you are now in very similar position. And I always suggest you can always, I think, come back to doing a postdoc. A lot of this depends on visas and stuff too. Like as an immigrant, again, like
it's just about
this is
the primacy and the ease of which a J1 visa can be conferred in the US. It's one of the single easiest ways to just turn up and get started.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things that people default because of logistical and immigration reasons. There's literally no time to plan your career forward in the United States. You have to have a job within 2 months of finishing your PhD.
Yeah.
And so that's the easiest next step while you're planning forward.
Yeah, actually, I should have started with this statistic, and now I'm learning. That makes a lot of sense. In fact, that's what happened with me. That's what I could get, to be honest, despite my strongest belief and confidence in my skills that I could land a great software engineering job in Google or Microsoft, whatever, right? So anyway, before we get to the open discussion, we have, I guess I saved the last best speaker for the last, Dr. Chris Smith. Chris received his PhD in neurobiology from UNC Chapel Hill in 2014, then pursued a postdoc at Vanderbilt. While at Vanderbilt, he considered many career paths and became involved in supporting postdocs through leadership roles in the Vanderbilt Postdoc Association. Through that experience and engaging with career and professional development programming at UNC and Vanderbilt, he saw the value of those efforts in supporting PhDs and postdocs in their career search. Since 2019, he now works to support many postdoctoral scholars at NC State University as the Postdoc Affairs Program Manager. In addition, Chris is actively involved in national efforts to support career and professional development practitioners and the postdoc experience itself through his service on National Postdoc Association Board of Directors and Graduate Career Consortium Executive Committee. So the previous discussion on why most people choose postdoc is a perfect segue to whatever Dr. Chris Smith has to say. Without further ado, Dr. Smith.
Awesome. Thanks, Pradeep. And it's great to be here with all the panelists. And I echo a lot of what's said, and I'll keep my remarks short because I feel like we can get into discussion, and that's probably the best use of our time. But I totally agree that informational interviews are critical, and hopefully you take advantage of some of the resources out there online that I've been sharing in the chat. I also think it's really important to kind of engage in that self-reflection Jen talked about, really think about like what are your goals? And I guess to kind of build off what Gary and Sonali and James mentioned, sometimes the postdoc might be logically relevant given your constraints on immigration to then build some skills and an exit plan. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. As someone who supports postdocs, I think a lot of people probably shouldn't go down the path, to be honest with you, even though that would mean maybe I don't need to have a job. But I think people need to be more intentional about, how that serves their purposes. And then I think the other comment I'll make real quick is, that you don't have to do this alone. There are lots of great resources out there. There are lots of great communities out there, Slack communities, other ways to engage with people who are going through a similar time in their life. So leverage those and technology to do that. And I think the biggest challenge that we face in this space is just the lack of data. We've already talked about, outcome data, but you would think, academics would have studied their own job market, but they really haven't. And I think what's sort of crazy is it took a group of postdocs through a Slack group to do it, and probably not well, but at least we tried. And I think, just having the data, like if you want to be a faculty, that's great, but just knowing what it takes hopefully, or at least some sense of like, are you going to be competitive? So that if you're not, you can start making your exit plan. Because I do think we still need good people in the academy, but I think we want people not to think based on anecdote that they're going to be competitive when perhaps data shows they won't be. And there's a lot more to do to fill in those gaps. But those are my few comments. And yeah, I'm happy to go to the discussion and chat more about all this. So.
Thanks so much, Chris. So I originally scheduled a little open discussion between the panel with the goal of trying to see if we can come up with a rough guide towards how would one go about plan their career at the end of PhD or in the beginning of their postdocs. Should we do that or open for questions to the students? I leave it up to the panel.
Why don't we take questions? Because I suspect we can riff on the questions and kind of do discussion.
Okay.
What do you think, folks?
Yep.
Yeah, I
Chance and
agree.
anarchy. Let's go.
Let's go. All right. So audience, let me see who is raising the hands. We have a question for, oops. Everybody can just unmute themselves and actually ask the question. So go ahead.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
Are you able to hear me?
Just
Yep.
fine.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Ramana, and thank you for the panel for organizing this program. It's really interesting, especially for students like us. Like, I can just tell something about my journey. I'm in my final year of PhD. I have a postdoc offer in my hand, and I'm planning to transition. I'm an international PhD student in this country, and as Dr. Mazunda has already mentioned, we have all the visa challenges and the feasibilities to basically secure a job. Just echoing the same issues which I have encountered, but I already have a plan, but I don't know to what extent that's going to be feasible to leave academia and transition in industries. One important thing or factor which I always understood was the constant pressure what we have in academia in a tenure track position and other challenges which we have to work with a toxic environment. That's, I don't know to what extent that's feasible, but
can you
say
get to the question? Sorry. Yeah.
All right. So my question especially is about what are the things we have to consider, especially when we are trying to transition into an industry, with respect to the visa issues, where they have selectively mentioned on the criteria that they don't sponsor any of that, and I have just applied and just been very vain. And the second thing is about the recommendations. If the panel can help, because that's how some of my friends secured a job in the industry. It's always going to be someone who can watch for you in the industry. It's a straight path is very, very difficult. This is what I understand. But if you have some mixed opinion, I'm okay to listen to that as well. Thank you.
What country are you in, Salahuddin?
I'm coming from India.
No, right now, where are you?
I'm in Mississippi, USA.
Okay, I mean, I can take a lead on this one. United States, right? Okay,
Yes.
so first of all, if you're finishing your PhD here, you possibly are going to have if you're in STEM, you'll have a STEM OPD for 3 years, right? Don't waste it on an industry that would not sponsor you long term. Use it for go to like places like USA H-1B jobs and stuff to see what companies actually sponsor long-term work visas as well as other kinds of researcher visas, and try to apply for those positions where you can, because the first 3 years you have all the independence to move as many jobs as you want because your OPD is being supported by your graduate school. And so don't waste it on a company that would not invest in your long-term immigration support. I know the tendency that you would think that you can overachieve in a new place and they would support it, which is a fair thought. I have tried to do that myself. But also there are quite a few industries that would support your immigration moving forward. So try to I would say target your job search there. I'll stop there. Anyone else want to add?
No, that's great advice. So speaking personally, the 01 and green card routes. The main problem is, well, the problem with the O1 is it's expensive and smaller companies won't want to do it. The problem with the green card route is it takes approximately 4,000 years. And it would just be a continuous environment of uncertainty in the meantime, especially these days because everything is working legendarily poorly right now. The only other piece of advice, I mean, everything Sonali said was perfect, honestly. Find a time machine, go back in time, become an Australian and get an E3.
No, and also like I'm increasingly seeing, at least for citizens of India, they're starting to apply and look at global careers to other countries who are giving more express entry visas and talent visas like Australia and and Canada for PhDs in STEM, right? Like you have a lot more flexibility and chances to get a permanent residency right away. So also explore your interests and options in other countries.
Yeah, we are losing, to tell you just personally, we are losing a lot of engineers to Canada for overseas positions simply because they have made it so incredibly straightforward to go to Canada and engineer something. If they could just figure out their tax infrastructure when it comes to how they decide R&D should be funded, I think everything would be really interesting up there.
Yeah. So as a Canadian, as an originally Indian citizen who became a Canadian after my PhD and postdoc there and moved to the US, I would say I highly recommend going to Canada, but know that it's not paradise and they don't have an infinite number of jobs. Okay. It's not like you just get into the border and you have a big tree of jobs. It's not like that, you know? So it's very important to think about your realistic chance of landing something you want to do. You may choose to get the PR and go there and then try to find a job, which is perfectly fine. It's a great place with healthcare and whatnot. But people have this misconception that they can get jobs easily because they have a PR. Not true. You know, so it's important to think about how big the job market for your particular specific situation, which can be very different from many people. So I went through a lot of difficulties myself with immigration, sponsoring visas for my spouse and other issues too. So it's not paradise, just to be clear.
In Canada, there are folks who are immigration consultants. It's a regulated industry. So if you are interested, the immigration system everything is online, of course, on government websites, but there's like 17 different programs. So it gets complicated. So if you are interested, I would take advantage and have a consultation with one of those consultants or an immigration lawyer. Talk to someone for free first, just quickly, and make sure you got your ducks in a row.
So
Gary was going to say something.
Yeah, no, I just want to sort of add that there's a lot of this is I really endorse what Jen said about a lawyer, because so much of this is kind of arbitrary, and also like some of it is explicitly racist in that, for example, green cards, there's a different system for people from India and China, which makes it longer. I think that's still the case. And, you know, like, as James said, things have gotten so much slower. You know, I know of people coming from various places who have had to go down the O1 route where they would have normally done the H1B because it's just like impossible. But usually a good lawyer can like help you figure out how to jump all the hurdles. I'm surprised at how simple sometimes some things can be if all the things are lined up correctly, and someone who knows the system can really help you with that. You know, it's arbitrary. I am here because I married an American, and like I went from a J1 to green card and then citizenship, and like that was relatively straightforward to me. It's nothing to do with merit, right? Like that's what's frustrating. And so yeah, I would endorse like really doing that research for sure. Yeah.
I also endorse marrying an American or Canadian, by the way.
I can add on the things which you guys have discussed, just to give you kind of a bit background about what I've been doing in the last 3 years. So I have a very unconventional transition to United States. I was an assistant professor before even taking my PhD startup. So I would basically say that in the last 3 years, I invested my time in making my profile to match to a category of EB1A. And I have invested a good 3 years to basically now make it in a point that now I can basically apply for that. So the path of least resistance, which I actually feel that is to move from an OPT to EB1A and then apply for a green card and then take the exit from academia to get into an industry. This is actually what I envision to do. And
Great. Thank you.
So
Salahuddin.
that's the whole idea. But the thing is,
you.
when I'm trying to exit from there, that's when is my second question coming into picture is, I am looking 3 years down the line where I want to be. And as everyone has echoed, don't start just thinking that you got a postdoc, just be to that. But it's like, I always envision, and that's where I stand right now, that I've already made my profile enough to be an EB1A category. And now I'm going to file my petition very soon once I have my PhD in hand. So that's how the thing is, when I'm going to apply to these pharmaceutical industries, which I feel that most of them are in the United States, what are the things which I have to consider, like making connections, network, or LinkedIn will help, or anyone whom you know personally in those industries can vouch for you. That's how it works so far. So if you can throw some light on that aspect of it, it will be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, we can perhaps take this at the end when we have more time. So let's take a question from Anirudh. You are muted.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Hi. Yeah. Thank you for organizing this panel. Some great points were made. I just wanted some of your thoughts on making this transition from academia to industry also involves significant mental barriers, especially for those of us who always dreamt of having a job in academia, who love teaching and all of that. And so, yeah, I mean, I would love to have your advice on how to overcome some of these mental barriers, right? Because I feel like that's really the first step, before even we get around to implementing some of the suggestions that you had.
I can start us off. That's a great question. And I agree with you that I think that's really the barrier, because there are other things that are challenging, but they are less challenging once you've passed that first hurdle, which is all the emotional muck. And so I think my answer is first, it's great to recognize that you having these thoughts and feelings. I think it's great to sort of see the muck for what it is, to know that you're swimming in it. That's really important. Because then you can say, okay, so here's the thought that I'm having. Let me investigate, right? Let me put on my science researcher cap and investigate, is this bullshit or is this like a real, legitimate, rational, to use Gary's word, thought? So I think that's really important. And you can start to separate, the gunk from academic culture or from whatever, your own personal upbringing or whatever it is, from what's actually true and useful, because there are some things that might be true but not useful. They won't serve you. So that's one thing. And then I think you really want to focus on what's important to you. So don't ask the question, what does my advisor want for me? What does my mentor think I should do? What do people with a PhD in X field, what do they should do? I mean, that's sort of beside the point. It's like, what do you want? Who are you in the world? What's important to you? Because then you can rest your foundation, your identity on who you actually are and where you want to be going toward. And if those things happen to align with job postings that you see in academia, well, great. But it'll open up a lot of other things out there. Does that make sense? Anirudh, sorry, I'm butchering your name.
Yeah. Okay. Other panelists, do you want to?
I can. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is very much what I'm thinking about. What Jen said is exactly correct. I think people have dropped in here. There's like IDPs and like self-reflection kind of tools to like help you try and think about what it is that are the things that you like about what you do. And then I think a huge part of this is like trying to find other people outside the informational interview route. I think the network is key. So much of the mental barrier is, I think there's this echo chamber that we're in the academy. Like I see this when I come in, I give a talk and people are like, oh yeah, like this makes sense. And I know everyone just goes back to their labs. Their PIs are like, don't you listen to what he said? Like you can still be a PI. It's hard, but it'll work for you because you're smart, which is the message everyone's getting. And everyone is smart. there just aren't enough faculty jobs for all the smart people there are. Like that's the key, the crux of the issue. And so trying to talk to people who are outside, who have made that transition, who are in roles that you're interested in, I find that fascinating because it's different across different places. I find people who moved into industry have very different perspectives based on people who have moved into science communication. Like they have different values and different things they really get energy from. And if you meet someone that you find, oh, that's not really my thing, that's fine. You meet someone else and you're like, oh, I'm really engaged with that, then that can help you figure that out too. Yeah.
I'll tell you why it didn't happen to me. I've got too many friends who are scientists or engineers who are not in the academy. I've probably got more friends with PhDs who've got non-academic jobs than the alternative. And I would suspect that you do not have casual conversations with other people that you know about what happened during their day, how they feel about it. There's never a chance for any of this emotional resonance to go away. It's never going to feel normal until you have conversations with people in which it's normal. So it didn't really happen. I was just sort of choosing between one of the alternatives. I mean, I always thought I'd give it a red hot go, but unfortunately for me, I study something that has a tendency to ruffle the occasional feather, and there isn't a lot of funding for annoying people on a professional level. So, I mean, find your people. There's someone's going to want to talk to you about that. Or at the very least, I mean, you need to, if you have 2 or 3 informational interviews with someone who's just like you, who's made that transition, and then they start talking about the normal fabric of what various commercial jobs in your particular space look like, your perspective's going to change. I think that there's a tremendous fear of the unknown that is bred within the kind of tiny little circles that we build for ourselves in the jobs that we had. I mean, I used to joke about working in a basement, but I literally worked in a basement with the same 3 people. It was very unusual that I'd see anyone that wasn't the same 3 people every single day. We didn't talk about what life is like elsewhere. It was very task focused. And that is what happens in the vast majority of places. We're around the same bench, we share the same environment, we work a lot of hours. You don't have any social exposure to this completely very parallel in many respects, very similar in very respects. I mean, my life's exactly the same as Gary's. I write grants and don't get them as well still. I'm still publishing stuff. I'm still working on research. The mental distance is the real distance. Now, this dovetails very nicely into something that came through in the chat, which is asking about what are specific appropriate networks to use when you're doing networking in general. Is it okay to email individuals we do not know personally in the field with a question? Yes. Now, here's an interesting one for potentially for Chris and Sonali and Gary and Jennifer more than me. Are there specific conferences or places when it comes to sort of making contacts? How do we regard the contact generation process on a formal rather than an informal level? My answer is I have no goddamn idea whatsoever.
I mean, are you asking, are there career development conferences and symposia sort of things? I think there are more and more coming up. I know New York City has one. There are now virtual conferences where you can kind of learn about careers and build network. Most professional societies in the STEM and now increasingly in the humanities are also putting stuff up for events and conferences to like kind of meet people and learn about their career paths and stay in touch with them after that. And I mean, generally for me, the social media platform has like LinkedIn and Twitter have been the most powerful in just reaching out to people and learning about them. And I'll stop there. Gary, Chris.
So
Go ahead.
sorry, Jay. I'll emphasize that I personally tell people that Twitter is your continuous year-long conference. I think it's a good idea to engage with people across all what you call domains of life or science, so to say. And as you engage with them, you learn about their issues, the things they're thinking about, how they solve them, etc. And that leads to a lot of creative career opportunities, for example, in the government policy sector and various other niche domains that are coming up, right? Stay engage with people, ask questions, read more and whatnot. So go ahead, Gabe.
I was just going to say, I would be very selective about conferences and particularly look at ones, particularly organizations that focus on people. And I'm a little critical of scientific societies broadly because, I'm sort of like phasing in and out of membership of scientific societies at times because honestly, most of them are just societies for academic faculty. They're not actually for the field. And so it's like very frustrating being like, well, what's actually happening for people who are outside or trying to make connections? They're not a lot of use, some of them, but some of the things that have been most useful are places like SACNAS. There's the National Postdoc Association conference too. Some of these have been more useful for me because of the sort of world that I'm in. And I think like some of us in here, our careers have been very helped by like a lot of those professional development places because that's the sort of like world we're in. I'm not sure. James asks a really good question of like, what are the good industry conferences? There's a couple in Chicago. I'm in Chicago, and there's one just recently that I think was called Think Chicago, and there's some effort locally. I think maybe in Boston there might be, is it Mass Bio? Yeah, there's like these kind of like sort of more industry focused networks, organizations in like a bunch of places. I think New York has a lot of this too, and the conference Sonali mentioned too, New York is also very good. So like you have to be like very careful. I'm glad you brought that up, James. It's tricky, yeah.
I mean, I don't have too much else to add beyond, LinkedIn is super helpful to find people. And the alumni tool is one way to potentially find someone you have some shared connection with, right? Like I see you got your PhD from X and I, graduated from there. I'm doing a postdoc there. Sometimes that can help break through the awkwardness of like emailing someone you don't have any connection with to sort of show the shared connection. And the other thing I like to say, going back to kind of the comment about kind of the identity thing, and I think this is hard in academia and maybe especially in the US, you're more than your work. And there's nothing wrong with having a job that like pays the bills and maybe you find fulfillment in volunteering, right? At like the local museum or at the school or whatever, right? To kind of get that fix. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's sort of unfortunate that we wrap so much into a job that it has to fulfill you on all levels. And I don't know if that's healthy, to be honest with you. So yeah, those are just some more thoughts.
Let me just echo what other people have already said. So a couple of things. First, this is your job search. This is your personal job search. And I think like, please like remind yourself of that, folks. It's your personal job search. And so whatever you need to do and whatever makes sense for you is great. And it doesn't matter if it's relevant to anyone else out there, it's yours. And the second piece of that is that although it is your personal job search, nothing happens alone. And so absolutely do the informational interviews, go to conferences, network, have conversations online with folk, build your community, because that's what networking is. It's building a community. And if this means that you kind of distance yourself from your academic friends for a while and you don't mention to your advisor what you're actually thinking about, I'm not saying you have to do that, but like if that's totally fine. You need to find your community outside, or maybe not outside, but like in places that are going to affirm who you are and what you want, because we're always changing, and that's totally legitimate and cool. So yes, this is yours, and you need to find a community of people who will support you now and going forward. That's my pep talk. And those folks are out there, but I don't think anybody can sort of tell you who they are, maybe one at a time, but you start with one person at a time. And be a little bold, right? Just be a little bold, assume that you belong in the conversation. You do, I'm adding a third thing, and, send that email, then go for a walk around the block, right? Breathe, follow up a week later. If you haven't heard back, go for a walk around the block again and just have the conversation. It will be so much easier. And in my experience, when folks start doing informational interviews, everything changes for the better. It's amazing.
I want to add one more thing. I do a class on career education, and one thing that has been really helpful for us, people, especially those with social anxieties, is to do group informational interview and not doing it alone. And so not like, sometimes it's, if you have peers or friends who want to learn about different careers, just do it together, and that might put the pressure less on you, and you are doing it collectively, and that way you keep each other accountable and learn together as well. And so think of this as a group activity as well.
That's fantastic. That's the first genuinely new piece of advice I've so far. So I've not heard of anyone doing that, but that is an absolute gem.
Yeah, one of my students said they did it as a lab and they loved it. And so the culture is changing, and that's what we want to do.
That's brilliant. Look, I'll tell you one other thing just for fun. This is obliquely related to what we're talking about here. If there's one thing that it frustrates me that I can't inculcate in other people, it's that I've got sort of the opposite of social anxiety, which is I think of it as the sort of ability not to give a shit. And I can't think of anything else that's been more helpful when it comes to navigating spaces like this. It's probably a learned behavior from emailing people who didn't want to talk to me and being rejected a lot, and starting off being, well, looking like me and being as Australian as me. It probably helps. But I think that's the single one personality characteristic that has contributed the most to finding this just to be a process rather than an insurmountable barrier. I overthink things as well, but I overthink them to a certain point, and then I push a button, and then I try not to worry about it and deal with the consequences, And I've found that making this transition in particular, I've sort of walked a few people now, 3 actually, through the process of leaving a tenured position and going and getting a job like mine. Because I was very public about this a while ago. People wrote to me, and there isn't really a guide for that. But I can tell you something. They have exactly the same sort of thoughts that you're having now about the differences between the culture and whether or not they're welcome and how it's going to work and what they want out of their lives. And a completely similar and an additional completely separate set of concerns about how they have to run everything in parallel. So your boss may be doing this as well. You may find more commonality than you realize with the people that you work for. That being said, if you don't work in a lab that's run by a human being, which is more than half of them in my experience, then it may be incredibly difficult hurdle to get over. But I was very fortunate when I was at a university. I had a boss who sort of, we had a frank conversation about my eventually leaving, simply because I had spent a very long time working on the focus of the work that I had, so it was specifically applicable to working in the technical capacity at a company that built wearable biomedical devices. So he saw that, and I was allowed to have a conversation about that with my academic boss because he thought it was a good idea to talk about. Now that's rare. That's really unusual. I wish I could teach people not to give a shit. It would be really interesting to have a process that I've never seen anything like that. There's some sort of pop psychology books about it, But I do wonder how much heavy lifting that anxiety has to do. And group informational interviews are a brilliant idea, and I'm totally stealing it, but I will be crediting Sonali from this point on.
Yeah, one thing I would like to say, I guess, from my personal experience, is to remember and remind yourself that you just need one single job. That's how I try to get over this lot of rejections and lack of responses for my efforts, right? Even through my faculty job search a few years ago, right? I realized all I need is one fucking job that I like, that I won't hate. As soon as you keep that in mind, you realize that it doesn't matter if you don't hear from a lot of things. You know, what matters is just a few things that would actually take up and like and keep. Trust me, you may apply for a lot of things, but many of them work out for reasons that you don't know, they don't know. It's just a lot of jobs are posted with roles and responsibilities that are so broad and not useful in my opinion. And sometimes they already have candidates in mind, etc. So don't take things personally, and remind yourself that you need just one job. And if you're good enough to finish a PhD in the STEM disciplines or other domains, you're good enough to get a good job. Just a matter of time. Work through your feelings with friends and family and on Twitter, etc. So it's just an easy process once you realize that. So
I sort of want to add to that too. I was applying for some things earlier in the year and having a really hard time. There were so many interesting things. First of all, that like how much of my like personal value is whether somebody else values my labor. I was like that was really weird. Trying to work through that. Also the rejection, so much rejection, right? And that I have a lot of frustration with. There's a lot of like PhDs are great for everything, sort of I think as a justification for the number that there are, without a real appreciation of how competitive other things are, and like, you know, that you don't just walk into a job with a PhD, right? Like I think we're giving people that sense, and they're like, oh, academia is really hard and everything else you can just like, you know, because people aren't as smart outside, so you can like, you know, you'll be fine in like anything else. And it's actually not only I think often more competitive for some things, like I think of SciComm in particular, but also the path is less well trodden or less like visibly well trodden. Like it's very hard to get faculty jobs. There's a lot of information in our world about how to do that, and like you talk to a lot of people. Like there's a lot of resources when you think about it. There is a lot of hidden curriculum too, but like there's a lot out there. And you know, having set up a nonprofit and then having set up an LLC, like so much of that just having to learn by myself how to do these things with like no, you know, I just didn't know people who'd done it like that well. And that is actually like can be very, very, very hard. Or applying for jobs that are not, you know, as Jan laid out, a resume is like very different to like how academics think about applying for jobs. So these things like also make it very difficult because there's a lot of learning and research to be done and like actually going out and doing those. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to add to Gary's point also, because it's not easy to just walk into a different career path and interested in this. And I have a PhD. I had to like spend about a year volunteering and showing demonstrated experience. And also not just because they believe that you can learn quickly and solve the problem, but what as a hiring manager we are looking at are also, is this someone who is interested enough in this problem or this kind of work that they'll stick around for a year or 2 years or do this, right? Or because wanting to get away from academia is not a good framing. Just never talk about moving away from something. Most things is about moving towards something. And that's part of the self-assessment, right? Like if you really are doing volunteering work or upskilling yourself, that's one of the ways you can kind of figure out if that's something you like doing in a day-to-day job. And that'll also help you communicate that you like doing this and may put you in a competitive sphere for that position. So yeah, it's not easy to like transition from bench research, maybe directly into industry research, but other non-traditional paths, you have to really spend time figuring out for yourself if you want to do it and convince others.
Would anyone like to see, I mean, I get resumes most days. Would anyone like to see some resumes from people who've got advanced degrees but are writing good industry resumes and sending them to me?
I mean, can you share without breaking confidence? This is being
Yeah, of
recorded.
course I can. I'm already redacting them in the background. It's not some anonymous person's problem. Yeah. Okay. Got a yes. All right. Look, I'll throw them up because I mean, I can't remember who mentioned this earlier. I mean, whoever you are, the panel, you're right. The whole idea of framing something in terms of skills, things you did, not things that you achieved, the line items, the things that are important. We're only interested in skills, and then after that, we're interested in who you are, what you've. So a lot of this is framed in terms of I played this role within a project, and for us, of course, it's things like I've used this particular kind of software. This is my code base. This is my GitHub, etc., etc., etc. That's one thing, but I could potentially have mentioned this in the introduction. Nothing makes a whole lot of fussing around in the enormous job market that's possible as useful these days as some ability to code something. We have so many problems about interconnecting between Web 2 and Web 1 era systems and how we analyze and curate and disseminate data that we get. The world is drowning in data and software is eating it. And if there's one thing that makes a huge difference for me between this is someone who is like, if I'm going to hire a biomechanist in the nearish future, probably someone with a PhD for a job. The difference between I have a PhD in biomechanics and these papers, that's fine. I have a PhD in biomechanics in these papers, and here are the things that I did in order to build it. It's night and day in the framing. Frankly, our engineers will read a whole 1 or 2 page PhD, and they're just going to go straight to the line of the languages that you use. I mean, I know that's engineering specific, but I mean, it goes that deep when it comes to a technical field. You know, C#, Rust, Unity, interview them. It'll be that simple sometimes. So there are many environments as well, though. I mean, if you're going to be various researchers at nonprofits, etc. I mean, a little bit of SQL, just even learning to use pivot tables properly is wildly better than most other people who are just fossicking around with data stuff. Your ability to manage and manipulate data in any platform has just a wild and outsized importance compared to how it used to. And to me and people who think like me and have to fill roles like me, it's honestly the first thing we're looking for, apart from, you know, are you engaged? Do you know what the job is? Do you like it? Are you a decent human being who wakes up at a reasonable time every morning, et cetera, like, are you functional? And immediately after that, skills, not papers, couldn't give a toss.
Yeah, on the note of papers, one of the things I've noticed most in my transition, as I still write papers, is doesn't matter to me at all what my authorship is. People will actually argue amongst themselves about where I should be an author. I literally don't care. What's important to me is demonstrating to others what I did in that work. Like it's the paper itself is basically irrelevant. I mostly just enjoy writing papers, but that is the thing. It's like, what did I actually do? Like, nobody cares that a paper was a thing. But that's what we're very focused on in academia, that mindset of like, oh, there was a thing that was achieved, not like what was the actual thing that we did and how we did it. Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? Desiree, you want to ask? I think I see some chat. Michael. It's a friendly crowd. Feel free. Don't worry.
I just want to express there's a constant tension always between what works for individuals and what is required on the individual level versus like broad like advice for things. And so like, yeah, like Jen has just made that comment there. Like, this is always a tension that I experience and talk about systemic things. Like, very quickly it devolves into like, you know, immigration, for example, like there are some things that are just logistical that happen. I think a lot of the effort around career transparency is fewer people will postdoc if they know like what the outcomes are for doing a postdoc. But that has, I always say in these meetings, because it's always apparently full of Americans, that like that has no bearing on people like me who did their PhD abroad. It has no bearing on like the people who are like, this is the way of remaining here and like doing this kind of work is by postdocing. And so just telling people they shouldn't isn't going to work for a whole swath, like the majority, frankly, of people. And so there are all these things that like you have to be careful, like do or do not apply for my situation. And all advice is freely given, but should be free to like ignore as well. So yeah.
Let me read out what I wrote in the chat. It's just for the recording. And yeah, the broader point, exactly what Gary said, you know, if it's free advice, you know, okay. Right. So what skills that you should pick up, if you should pick up skills, depends entirely on what you want to do, right? So you don't want to take random advice, rely on your network once you've identified what you want to pursue, right? So once you've done that work, you've done the informational interviews and you've figured out for yourself with the help of others what you're missing, if anything. Because it doesn't matter how useful a skill is in general in the world, if it shows up on like all the lists of skills that employers want, it doesn't matter whether, if you don't want to use that skill, if you don't want to do that kind of work, and if it doesn't exist where you want to live, et cetera, right? So you want to get really specific advice for your life.
Yeah, so that is a good segue to a question from Tanya Perestrello. I don't think I'm saying it right, but yes, it helps a lot to have a mentor in this transition. And I think panelists have touched upon it in different angles, including the fact that some of your immediate bosses or peers probably don't know how to do it. So it's important to try find the right ones to help you with what you want to do. So network a lot. That's my personal advice. Going to conferences every single year is what I think helped me a lot to succeed, to learn things that I would not have learned if I just stayed in my bubble. One of those things, two big things that helped me were recognizing the open science movement. I did not realize that until like I landed in a postdoc job in a different city. And connecting with that community helped me rejuvenate my motivation to pursue academia. And two, Python. Like James was saying, you know, the engineers go straight to looking at what languages were used, whether they would talk to them or not. That's very important. I realized that a little bit later. I considered myself a great software engineer, but I just didn't do it in Python, and industry does not give a damn about your MATLAB skills, you know, which is probably most used in the STEM disciplines, etc. Right? So find mentors broadly in the industry and creative places and whatnot. You know, LinkedIn and Twitter are great places to find these people.
And mentors just are people in your network. So first of all, I mean, yeah, you can hire someone like me. I mean, you can do that, right? Or you can talk to someone on campus like Sonali or Chris. Totally. I mean, we know stuff and we can help. But beyond that, all everyone really needs is to build their network. And you're not relying on one person, because one person only knows what they know. And, you know, even though, I mean, you know, I'm a generalist here, right? So even though I've been in this field and I know a ton of shit, like I'm a generalist. So at a certain point, my advice stops and you got to go and seek out people to network with. I don't like the word mentor. I think that's way overused in academia. So I think, you know, okay, but my advice is like do informational interviews. And, you know, you don't have to overdo things. Just seek advice as you need it from the people that can give it to you. Getting annoyed about this. Am I making sense?
I mean, the only thing that I would add in here is this is from a perspective of someone who's an immigrant and possibly, you know, not white. And so in terms of like, I know we overuse mentor. For the people that you reach out to, at least try to identify some people that you want to stay in touch. And the idea of like create a small group of sponsors who would recommend you to places, who would remember you and think of you when they see a job that you would be good for. It's easy to find people who give you free advice all the time, right? Like people like talking about their lives, they'll give you advice. It's hard to find the people who would remember you and advance you and help you. And so while you are cultivating networks and talking to people, try to see who some of these people could be you could stay in touch with and cultivate a small group of sponsors in your life.
Mm. Yeah, I never had people always have this kind of Professor McGonagall version of mentoring, and it's horseshit. You don't want one, but you want 25 people who talk to you for the second time. Business people do have mentors, right? But they have mentors that are really specific to the jobs that they have, right? So I have someone who sort of quasi plays this role. And that is a really specific relationship that is tied to the company stage, what we build, how we do it, jobs that he used to have. He was the CSO of 2 other companies. So literally like scaling a biomedical device company from a certain stage is the thing that I need help with. That's a mentor. You don't need a mentor, you need a network of people who'll actually talk to you more than once.
Yeah, so I like what Jennifer has said. I think from my understanding, what they mean is you need a support network more than just one mentor, right? So the support network can be built from all sorts of circles in your life, and I think you'll have to keep doing that as you go through career stages too, and change countries and jobs and whatnot, right? So
I mean, let's just be clear. Networks is also how people in the academy get faculty jobs. Like everyone gets jobs through networks. It's not that, oh, you're the best at like doing this kind of science. Like no one comes to your lab and is like, oh, your data is so good, like I'm going to hire you. Networks are like, we should make this explicit. Everyone is doing this through networks. This is why so many people are so frustrated about conferences at this time, because like people can't see each other in person and network. And they've been sort of making that explicit, which has been really interesting, because I'm like, I thought this was a meritocracy. I thought it was how good you were as a scientist, but it's networking. Everyone networks. And like, I think we're sort of giving a suggestion like that's different for leaving. Everyone who wants a job should be networking. Like that is, and meeting other people. Like that is key to every position. Yeah.
It's a meritocracy is one of the greatest lies that we tell ourselves. As I have no intrinsic belief in the idea that there's a rankable system of merit. I mean, if there's the thing that's disabused me most of this idea, including the legendary amounts of just there's no it's impossible. It's impossible to rank people. We argue all the time about the futility of ranking papers or ranking research outputs or ranking individual people within a variety of academic contexts. Why the hell would you think it would be true anywhere else? The vast majority of the time when we're hiring, we've got a specific thing that we want, and we want someone who is like clear over the bar, not a whole way up to the sky, not the best person in the whole world. We want someone who we can work with, who can do the work as fast as humanly possible. And the fastest humanly possible part, the knowing where to look part, is generally where the network comes in. Because there's probably thousands of people in the country who could do any individual role, sometimes a lot more than that. Who gets to do it? The person who knows that it's there first, the person who's told about it, the person who's brought into how information is aggregated within that environment. And especially, I mean, I got my very first intern. I hired him because I met him and I thought he was awesome. Nothing like me at all. But the reason that I met him in person is because he identified the company that he wanted to work for, which is us. And then he emailed us 3 times at 2-week intervals. Now, that's not going to work for everyone. And some people hate that. Some people being bothered. But it's fine at a startup. Everything's always chaotic all the time. People don't pass the email on to the right person. It ends up on my desk and like, this guy emailed 3 times. I like that. That's good. Get him in. It took me 36 hours to get him into the office, and I hired him on Friday. Now, he just went out and did that himself. He's just that kind of guy. That's all it took in context. He's a full data scientist proper now, simply because, you know, people show up, they have skills. Now, if it was on the basis of merit, if I looked through his resume and then said technically he's underqualified, because technically he was, then it would have been a completely different story. This is like, the world is much more open than you think. Academia leads you to think like the things are siloed. It's not siloed. It's a glorious cacophony.
Yeah, I guess that reminds of the previous comment that take ownership of this job search. It is your personal job search, no one else's, and take initiative. I think that's what James is trying to say now, right? So
yeah, I could have summarized. Take initiative is good.
No, we would have hoped PhD helps everyone apply that skill in their life, you know, but I guess it also yeah. Anyway, so if audience have no further questions, perhaps we can try get some summary of advice from the panel again. And what I was hoping to do is to come up with some sort of rough guide. Do these 10 simple things and be happy forever, you know. And if you can summarize, yeah, do the panelists want to say something, you know, just do these 3 or 5 or 10 things.
Not to derail it, but there is a part of me that's like, if it were that simple, that this nut would have been cracked a long time ago. And I think there are sort of overall arching things that maybe people can come up with, that, like, you know, this is why I've become so interested in the identity part. And like, as we've been talking about, the mental part is like one of the hugest parts. And there's no easy way of just being like flipping that switch mentally. Like, you know, again, it's like a long process. Although to contribute to that, I would say, like, you know, some sort of like the conversation part, like the steps of talking with people explicitly about that part of it, people who have moved on, which maybe forms part of the like broader network sort of mentoring conversation. But I think you have to be addressing those exact points of like that part of the process. Yeah.
All right. I had a hard stop at 12:30. I got data scientists blowing my Slack to pieces as we're having this conversation from here on. But I'll give you 3 points and I'm going to bounce. The first one would almost certainly be the fact that you are a snowflake. Everything that is coming, all of this very general advice has to be fit to context. You have a degree, you have a career stage, you have an immigration status, you have things that you can and can't do. You live in a certain place, you have a certain amount of access, you have a certain amount of family, you have a certain amount of things that you expect from your life. You have a long list of mental things that you do or don't want to do. And your job is matching up the general advice to the specific circumstance. And that is probably really challenging to do for the first time. I don't think we need to reiterate anything about the power of networks past this particular point in time. Something that we haven't touched on. Academics who write all day, who write badly, knock that shit off. If you want to, anything that is a job that requires you to communicate effectively, which is most of them. That is something that everyone can work on. I work on it continuously. I have the opposite problem. My communications are allegedly too brief and hostile. It's a matter of being able to fit that to task. Please, for the love of God, learn to not speak academic, because there's an awful lot of doors that are just like, I can't read this. Everyone is busy. the actual, and it doesn't matter if your English isn't great or you have an accent, etc., etc. The ability to get to the point and express things clearly is an enormous drag factor if you don't have it throughout any particular part of this process. The third thing I would say is a direct reflection of what was on Pradeep's slides 90 minutes ago, which is plan ahead. Time is on your side if you're in a degree and the degree is long, yeah? But I mean, think about it in terms of getting a fellowship or a grant or looking for a job opportunity within academia. You apply in February, right? They eventually look at it in May. They think about it for 2 extra months for some reason. You find out in December, yeah? Big pieces of the world work like this. It's annoying. That's the speed that governments and big organizations work. And a university is a big organization funded by the government. Startups do not do that. It's totally antithetical to every single thing that we're about. But huge chunks of the world do. So for the love of God, you've got to plan out just how long these individual steps are going to take in your head. Which means that, the best, the whole thing, that the best day to have started is yesterday. It's all very trite, but the whole point is it takes longer than you think. The visa thing takes longer than you think. The grant thing takes longer than you think. Finding the right people takes longer than you think. It all takes longer than you think until you get to a point where it happens without you having to engage with it and go out and do networking, when networking just happens because you're surrounded by people. So for the love of God, appreciate the time scale involved. Now, thank you. I had fun. I really do have to hit it here. It's nice to meet everyone.
Thanks a lot, James. Much appreciated. Jennifer, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Let me put up my slide again. That's it. That's the simple 3-step. Focus on yourself. Self-assessment, self-reflection. Don't skip that shit. People skip it. It doesn't work. Right? So, and of course, I'm making it sound like step 1, 2, 3 are hermetically sealed and they go in order. It's messy in reality, but framework. Focus on yourself. Then identify possibilities. Talk to people. Informational interviews. Yes, do research online, whatever, but talk to people. Talk to a lot of people, 50, 24, at least 10. Narrow your options down to manageable, 2 to 3. Then market to employers. Forget about your resume before then. Don't talk to me about converting a CV to a resume, right? Once you know what you want, then you can find out how you can build a strategic job search strategy that makes sense for your target fields, industries, job types, whatever, right? Random advice, as always, isn't going to help you. So you go back to the network you started building, you keep networking, you build all of the things that you need to do to market to employers. I use that language purposely. It's easy, right? I know it's not easy, but I'm hopeful that kind of simply stated strategy will make sense for folks. Let me take it down.
Oh my God, I love the way you said it. Don't skip that shit. Doesn't work. It cannot be more clear than that. So who wants to go next?
I mean, I can chime in. I agree with everything Jen said. I guess a practical thing is, I think it kind of goes around marketing and meeting people, is create a LinkedIn profile. Now, if you don't have one, and it can get better over time, but that's the way to start to market yourself. It comes up in Google search. That's the way to connect with people. So if there's one practical tip, that's the one I would give. And obviously all the things we've said already. But I also think through your network, you can also find support, right? So it's not just about your job search, but someone who's navigated the transition and how did they deal with those things? Even if maybe that's not the transition for you, but just their approach to transitioning. So I think you can get a lot out of these conversations beyond advice for your job search. You can get advice on just dealing with the transition or common things other people, encountered and how they dealt with it. You just can't duplicate talking to people. And I'm an introvert. I don't like doing it either, but you have to talk to people. You just have to do it. It's so valuable.
Gary?
Yeah, just to build on that a little, I can say from personal experience, as someone who's worked from home for 5 years and then also through the pandemic, that the isolation is can be the worst part. and you can feel that you're like entirely alone in this, and like maybe, you know, you just start to convince yourself that like you are wrong, and you need that like external feedback and validation, and like sometimes you are wrong about things, but like, you know, generally you're probably in the right space, and you need other people who are also in that space to like, or have been through it to help you with it. So that's, yeah, it's not a thing to be done entirely by yourself. There's things to do by yourself, like your own homework, but like it can't all be done by yourself. Just can't.
Well, that's a fantastic point we haven't touched upon so far. Yeah, I mean, many of us, especially those first generation researchers, so to say, don't have a lot of people in the family or friends network who have been on this road. I have lived experience that I can relate to everything Gary said. Yeah, talk to people. You know, people are kind. A lot of people, just reach out to them. If they have a Twitter profile and you see that semi-active, know that most people would reply to your questions, or when you email them, when you take the time to do your own due diligence and ask a specific question that they can answer, I think most people would reply. In fact, I've been helped by friends I made on Twitter in my job search. And I did not even expect that, especially coming from places or bubbles who were not as helpful, to put it mildly, right? So talk to people. There is good people out there. I did put a link to mentoring program from OHPM, a society I really like. And I think that many other societies and what do you call clubs or whatever are starting to have them. So like Chris was saying, you know, you can't duplicate talking to people. You know, it's a very good way to put it. There is no other way to do it. It's a soul searching process about finding what you want and just talk and learn from people. So audience, this is your last chance. If you have any questions, this has been a fantastic panel. I learned a lot actually, and I hope this will serve many other people over time. So thank you for all the panelists for your time and kind advice. I greatly appreciate it. I'll be sharing this video on YouTube pretty soon, and maybe it'll try to summarize the advice into a little document or page that you can probably help edit later on. So thank you again, much appreciated. And let's make everyone's lives better in academia. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Pradeep. Thanks all.
Yeah, thanks, folks. Great to be here with you. And happy